Sarah Murdoch with the Nature Conservancy. Those were both great presentations. Thank you. I have a question for John. I really am impressed by the packaging of all that information and how it's so accessible. I'm interested on the mitigation side. You showed providing a lot of information on mitigation to the individual property owner. What about for the community level? So, we're really interested in incentivizing community level mitigation related to natural infrastructure. So I'm curious about that.
So I'd love to get with you afterwards. Because of timing limitations, we actually have what's called an iRisk site that actually constructs the full FEMA compliant mitigation plan. And flood is the starter for that. So we actually have all other hazards in our system. Once you have the structures, once you have the community information, you can apply any different hazard and calculate the impact. So we actually have that on our iRisk site. And so we carry them through the mitigation planning process. And we're trying to reconstruct our 5-year life cycle for risk management to start with flood, but include all of those items.
Within the program, how are you going to address, or how do you plan to address climate change? This is about the mapping system for North Carolina.
Say that question one. I'm sorry.
How are you addressing climate change?
Well, you've probably heard North Carolina doesn't. In that same application we just talked about, North Carolina actually did a sea level rise risk management study about 4 years ago. That information is actually integrated in that same mitigation planning process. And I will just say, all of that information was leveraging what we did with floodplain mapping in our coastal studies. So we're working towards that, trying to incorporate drought, a lot of the other items that are out there, but flood, we've actually constructed some stuff on sea level rise.
Did you want to address sea level rise issues? All right.
He wanted me to speak on sea level rise. I can tell you we've been working with our partners on the climate side for about a decade, but our focus is very much on the practical aspects. So we've seen convergence between the climate resilience movement and the disaster resilience movement, and frankly, just to be kind of cheesy about it, it has floated all the boats up. We've gotten together, we've focused on our intersection and our opportunities, which are information sharing. Sea levels are rising. We choose to let others debate why they are. So now the question for us is, what are we going to do about it? And that's where we focus our work on those things that we can do. I just spoke a couple weeks ago at the Concrete Sustainability Forum in Miami, and one of the most poignant pictures was put up by the Deputy of Environmental for Miami-Dade. But it was a picture of a gentleman in Broward County in his front yard on an ordinary storm day, not an extraordinary, not a Sandy, nothing of the kind. He had a snorkel and a mask. He was submerged in his front yard, and there was no street access whatsoever. So our focus is that level of information from one extreme on an ordinary day. Just imagine where the sea level rise is going to take us. Once you start helping people understand where it comes home to them, no trash pickup, no plumbing, those kinds of things, then we can really get some things accomplished. So that's kind of how we work in it on a practical basis.
Yeah, this question is for Leslie. You talk about resiliency. Within ASFPM, we talk about resiliency and sustainability. Within your organization, have you taken on the idea of avoidance?
Did you say avoidance?
Avoidance.
Yes, we have. And my sustainability experience recently being with that group, what we talk about is there's no sustainability if you're not first disaster resilient, right? So it's a path. And avoidance is one of the most important options if it's real. We do talk about it. there's so much, in new construction, we're probably talking, I mean, building codes are critical, but the new construction accounts for what percentage of our housing stock in our built environment? 2, 4, 5%? We see the opportunities, the big push opportunities as coming post-disaster. But what we also know is we want to have a strategy for what some call peacetime. So avoidance is tough in peacetime, all right, unless you're in a planning and development phase. But in so-called wartime, post-disaster and post-event, what we are trying to do is get electeds to think about, okay, imagine the worst has happened. And this is, I think, what you see in the flood areas when they talk about what they're going to do differently when the big one comes, and then they're ready and spring to action, like in the Netherlands and different places. If it, you know, it's like when we talk about putting a new roof on a house, we're not going to have somebody just go and do that then unless they need a new roof. So the plans, the triggered plans for post-disaster and having the agreement and the disagreement and the consensus built ahead of time, I think is the most key aspect to having the opportunity to really get people into a different place. And I think that from talking about what we do, this is not a one transaction kind of sell. This whole thing that all of us engage with. This isn't, I once worked in highway safety. We were simply trying to get people to click a seatbelt. But even that wasn't a single transaction informational progression. It's something you have to have heard before, aware. You have to understand what that means to you, where you live, where you build, where you work. And then you have to either accept or reject the fact that you're going to do it that way. And that's the only way we get down the continuum to what we want, which is people to think and do differently in the face of disaster. So the exercises we're doing for the Mayor's University will include the thinking. We have a futurist on our team. Imagine the worst has happened. What are you not going to build back? That's not a question we often ask, but in the context of what you all do here, I think it's one of the most critical questions we can ask.
There's still time for maybe one more question.
Yeah.
Over
Just
there.
one more, thanks, Bill. John, this is for you. Rod Scott from Louisiana. We've got probably 40,000 structures elevated now since Katrina in the 9 years. My community's 60% elevated, and now you can't sell the houses on the ground. With this information that you're providing, I'm looking at it from the real estate transaction viewpoint. If I was to look at purchasing structures, I would go to that site and I would automatically offer those building owners far less for their structure because of knowing if they're pre-firm, and we're going to have to mitigate the structure as part of a purchase and rehab. So I also think that there's some tremendous coming impacts to communities with the tools that you've provided beyond just the current owners. I think we're going to see some really substantial, with the flood insurance changes, we're going to see some really substantial value changes in communities.
And I'll just make the point that when we started the iRisk project, which is a part of the overall flood theme project, we talked to the real estate community because we recognize the issue there. When we sat down with them, they said, look, this is going to devastate our industry if you show this. I said, okay, so you're going to be a seller, right? What about your buyers? They said, well, I absolutely need it. I need it so I can help those guys. So I think there's some struggle there, but I think they need both sides of it. And I think being able to put the information out there for all allows some conversation to take place. And one of the things I'm hoping for is on the insurance side of things is that they can actually identify some property and know exactly what to build it to so that the insurance rate goes down so the person likes the spot. One, because they're resilient from future floods, but also because they're not having to buy as much insurance. So we hope the process will go well.
I got permission to jump on that one too real quick. I'm going to give you a prediction that I use everywhere I go to that to all of us comes as very good news, but to others like our realtor and other financial services sector people have them kind of scratching their head. Building rating for MLS, Zillow, Trulia for disaster resilience is coming. The U.S. Resiliency Council is already rating structures for earthquake. I was at a gathering and there was a great, no, you can't, that's terrible. And somebody stood up from the Applied Technology Council and told these folks, it's already here. There are big data companies working right now. It's like when they said Carfax wasn't fair and that you can't do that. Wrong. That's what we do in this country. We measure things, we give them a score. We want the number, we're going to have the numbers on buildings. So this data that you have, that kind of data is going to drive those scores, and it's going to be very disruptive. And that's another kind of layer of strategies that we need to start thinking about because it's already happening. So you heard it here.